The aluminum strips catch the harsh fluorescent light of the briefing hut as Flight Engineer Sergeant Tommy Barnes turns one over in his calloused hands. It's no bigger than a ruler, thin as cigarette paper, weightless as a promise. Around him, 2 dozen RAF aircrew lean forward in their wooden chairs, studying identical strips with the bewildered expressions of men asked to believe in magic. "Window," Squadron Leader Harrison announces, his voice cutting through the cigarette smoke that hangs in the July evening air like fog. "That's all you need to know about the name?" Tommy exchanges glances with his pilot, Flying Officer James Mac McPherson, whose freckled face mirrors his own confusion. They've been flying together for 8 months now, 17 missions over the Ruhr, each one a dice roll with death. They know the weight of every rivet in their Lancaster, the sound of every engine note, the precise moment when Jerry's searchlights would find them dancing across the night sky. But this looks like something his mum would use to wrap Sunday roast. Each aircraft will carry approximately 2,000 bundles, Harrison continues, consulting his clipboard with the mechanical precision of a man who's learned not to think too hard about what his orders mean. Release them at 15-second intervals once you're over the target area. Do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not deviate from the timing. The briefing room feels smaller now, pressing in with the weight of secrecy. Through the single window, Tommy can see the ground crews already loading the mysterious bundles into bomb bays designed for high explosives and incendiaries. The irony isn't lost on him. Tonight, they're carrying Christmas decorations to a city that's about to burn. Mac raises his hand. "Sir, what exactly do these strips do?" Harrison's pause stretches like a held breath. When he speaks again, his words carry the careful weight of a man repeating something he doesn't fully understand himself. "They interfere with enemy radar systems. Beyond that," he shrugs, "you'll see for yourselves." Tommy fingers the strip again, feeling its sharp edges, imagining thousands of them tumbling through the darkness toward Hamburg. Somewhere in that city, families are sitting down to dinner, children are being tucked into bed, mothers are writing letters to sons who may never come home. The same rituals playing out in Manchester, where his own mother is probably listening to the BBC and knitting socks for soldiers she'll never meet. But here's what gnaws at Tommy as he files out of the briefing hut with the others. In all their previous raids, they'd relied on darkness and luck to survive Jerry's defenses. Tonight, for the first time, they're carrying a weapon that promises to blind their enemies completely. The question that makes his hands shake as he climbs into the Lancaster's familiar cockpit isn't whether these metal strips will work. It's what happens to the people below when an entire city's defenses simply disappear. 15 kilometers south of Hamburg, Hans-Erich Nosack sets down his cup of ersatz coffee and steps onto the small porch of his heath cottage. The evening air carries the scent of blooming heather and pine resin, tinged with the summer heat that's been building for days across northern Germany. His wife, Misi, calls from inside about some trivial domestic concern, but her voice seems to come from another world entirely. Something feels wrong tonight. Not wrong in the way of impending storms or personal anxiety, but wrong in the fundamental order of things, as if the earth itself has developed a slight tremor that only he can sense. Meanwhile, 60 kilometers northwest in the radar bunker at Stade, Obergefreiter Klaus Weber adjusts his headphones and stares at the green glow of his Würzburg radar scope. The circular screen pulses with mechanical precision, its sweep arm painting electronic pictures of the North Sea approaches. Weber has been watching these screens for 18 months now, guiding night fighters to their targets with the cold efficiency of a man who's learned to see aircraft as geometric blips rather than flying coffins filled with young men. Tonight's shift began like any other. The usual scattering of RAF reconnaissance flights, probing the edges of German airspace like cautious animals testing a fence. Weber and his team had plotted each contact with practiced routine, calling out ranges and bearings to the Luftwaffe controllers who would vector Messerschmitt 100s and 10s into attack positions. But now, at 2147, something unprecedented appears on his scope. Mein Gott, Weber whispers, leaning closer to the green glow. The screen shows what looks like a massive cloud formation approaching from the northwest, not the usual scattered formations of 30 or 40 bombers, but a solid wall of contacts stretching across the entire width of his surveillance sector. He counts quickly. 50 contacts, 100, 200. His training tells him this is impossible. The RAF has never mounted a raid of this magnitude. But the evidence pulses before his eyes with each sweep of the radar arm, growing larger and more defined with every passing minute. In the cottage on the heath, Nossack feels it before he hears it, a vibration in the soles of his feet, transmitted through the earth from some distant source of mechanical power. He knows this sensation from previous raids, but tonight it feels different, deeper, more persistent, like the footsteps of giants walking across the landscape toward his small sanctuary. Back in Tommy Barnes's Lancaster, now designated Baker Fox 202 for tonight's mission, the 7-man crew settles into their combat routine. Mac guides the heavy bomber into formation with the stream of aircraft emerging from bases across Lincolnshire and Yorkshire. Navigation lights wink in the darkness like earthbound stars, each one representing 35 tons of aluminum and steel carrying 7 young men toward an uncertain fate. Tommy checks his instruments for the third time, running through the familiar litany of engine temperatures, fuel flow, and hydraulic pressures that keep their 4 Merlin engines pulling them through the night sky. But his attention keeps drifting to the bundles of window stacked beside his position. 2,048 packages of aluminum strips, each one precisely cut to 30 centimeters in length for reasons no one has bothered to explain to the crew. "Pilot to all crew," Mac's voice crackles through the intercom. "We're approaching the enemy coast." "Gunners, keep your eyes peeled for night fighters." In the rear turret, Sergeant Bill Hawkins swivels his 4.303 Browning machine guns through their mechanical arcs, scanning the darkness for the telltale exhaust flames of German interceptors. He's been flying with this crew since their operational training unit days, long enough to know that Mac's steady voice masks the same knot of fear they all carry into enemy airspace. The irony hits Hawkins as he searches the empty sky. Tonight, for the first time in his operational career, he might not need to fire a shot. Weber's radar scope now shows an aerial armada unlike anything in the history of warfare. 791 4-engine bombers arranged in 6 separate waves approaching German airspace with the inexorable precision of a mechanical tide. He's already telephoned the regional air defense headquarters, his voice betraying the barely controlled panic of a man whose world has just tilted off its axis. "This is stayed radar control," he reports to the operations room in Hamburg. "We are tracking multiple large formations approaching from grid reference." He pauses, checking his calculations again. "Sir, we are tracking what appears to be the entire Royal Air Force." But what Weber doesn't know, what none of the German radar operators scattered across northern Europe know, is that tucked into the bomb bays of those approaching aircraft, nestled between high explosive bombs and incendiary canisters, are 1.5 million strips of aluminum foil, each one cut to a length that will precisely match the wavelength of his Würzburg radar. In 93 minutes, those strips will begin falling through the darkness like mechanical snow, and Weber's electronic eyes will go permanently blind. The technology that has protected Hamburg for 3 years of war is about to become as obsolete as a medieval crossbow, and the men operating it have no idea they're about to witness the birth of electronic warfare. Tommy Barnes checks his watch. 22:15. Time to target, 75 minutes. The transformation of warfare itself hangs in the balance of the next hour. At exactly 22:48, Tommy Barnes releases the first bundle of window into the slipstream of Baker Fox 202. The aluminum strips explode from their paper wrapping like metallic confetti, caught immediately in the Lancaster's prop wash and scattered across a cubic kilometer of night sky. Tommy counts to 15, 1001, 1002, then releases another bundle, and another. The routine becomes mechanical. Count, release, watch the strips disappear into the darkness below. But 60 kilometers away, Weber's radar scope erupts into electronic chaos. The first strips hit his Würzburg frequency at 22:51, and the effect is instantaneous. The clean, sharp contacts that have tracked the bomber stream for the past hour suddenly bloom into fuzzy clouds of interference. Weber blinks hard, thinking his eyes are playing tricks after hours of staring at the green glow. He adjusts the gain controls, fine-tunes the frequency settings, even smacks the side of his scope with the palm of his hand. The interference spreads like electronic cancer across his screen. "What in God's name?" Weber starts, but his words are lost as every radar installation from the Dutch coast to Denmark begins reporting the same phenomenon. The German air defense network, built with Teutonic precision over 3 years of war, dissolves into static in the space of 4 minutes. In the Hamburg air defense bunker, Hauptmann Friedrich Losigkeit stares at the telephones ringing simultaneously from every radar station in his sector. The reports coming in make no tactical sense. Massive formations that appear and disappear like ghosts, contacts that multiply impossibly before dissolving into electronic snow. Tracking systems that have functioned flawlessly for months, suddenly unable to distinguish between aircraft and atmospheric interference. "Sir," his communications officer reports, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Stade reports complete radar failure. Cuxhaven reports the same. All tracking stations from Wilhelmshaven to Lübeck are reporting loss of contact. Losigkeit feels something cold settle in his stomach. In 32 years of military service, he's never faced an enemy capable of reaching through space itself to pluck out his eyes. Above the chaos, Mack guides Baker Fox 202 into its bombing run, with the steady concentration of a man who's done this dance 17 times before. But tonight feels different, lighter somehow, as if the familiar weight of German air defenses has suddenly lifted from his shoulders. The searchlights below sweep the sky with their usual mechanical persistence, but they seem aimless now, groping blindly through the darkness without their electronic guidance. "Bomb aimer to pilot," comes the voice of Sergeant Peters through the intercom. "I can see the target indicators. Pathfinders have marked the aiming point. Below them, Hamburg spreads like a glowing map, etched in blackout regulations and industrial geometry. The Elbe River curves through the city center, reflecting the occasional flicker of Pathfinder flares, red, yellow, and green markers that the RAF crews call Christmas trees for their festive colors. But there's nothing festive about their purpose. Each flare marks another section of the city destined for destruction. Tommy continues his mechanical routine. 15 seconds, release, count again. By now, Baker Fox 202 has scattered nearly 800 bundles of window across the Hamburg approaches, and every other aircraft in the stream is doing the same. The aluminum strips fall through the darkness like technological snow, each piece reflecting German radar signals back into meaningless chaos. In the cottage on the heath, Nossack hears it first as a distant rumble, like summer thunder that never quite arrives. But this sound has a mechanical quality that makes his skin crawl. The synchronized drone of 1,800 aircraft engines pulling their loads toward his horizon. He steps off the porch and walks to the garden gate, straining his eyes toward the northwest where the sound seems to originate. What he sees stops his breath entirely. The night sky pulses with unnatural light. Searchlights sweep frantically across the darkness, their beams crossing and recrossing in geometric patterns that speak of desperation rather than coordination. Anti-aircraft shells burst in silent flowers of flame, but they seem scattered now, random, firing at shadows and memories instead of actual targets. "Misi!" he calls toward the cottage. "Come quickly." You must see this, but Misi doesn't respond, and Nosak realizes with a start that she's already descended into their small cellar, following the instincts of a civilian population that's learned to burrow into the earth when death comes calling from above. Weber makes one final attempt to restore his radar coverage, cycling through emergency frequencies that should theoretically be immune to interference. But each new setting brings only more static, more chaos, more electronic blindness. The bomber stream has become invisible to German technology, as if it never existed at all. All stations, he broadcasts on the emergency frequency. This is stayed radar control. We have lost all tracking capability. Repeat, we are blind. Vector night fighters to visual contact only. But without radar guidance, the Luftwaffe's night fighter force becomes as helpless as medieval cavalry facing machine guns. Messerschmitt 100s and 10s circle aimlessly through the darkness, their pilots reduced to hoping for lucky glimpses of exhaust flames or silhouettes against the stars. At 23:14, the first bombs begin falling on Hamburg. Tommy watches through Baker Fox 202's Astrodome as the city below erupts in flame. High explosive bombs crater the streets and shatter water mains, while incendiaries splash liquid fire across rooftops and into the broken buildings. The carefully coordinated attack unfolds with mechanical precision. Wave after wave of bombers releasing their loads onto a city that can no longer defend itself. But what Tommy cannot see from his altitude is the human cost of his window strips. In the Hammerbrook district, Matilda Wolf Münkeberg huddles in her apartment building's cellar as the world above her head dissolves into chaos. The bombing is unlike anything she's experienced in 3 years of war. Not the scattered, opportunistic attacks of previous raids, but a sustained avalanche of destruction that seems to have no end. "Never have I felt the nearness of death so intensely," she will write later, when the shaking stops long enough for her to hold a pen. "We choked with the smell of burning. We were blinded by sudden flashes of fire." The aluminum strips that Tommy Barnes has been dropping with mechanical precision have done more than blind German radar. They've removed the only technological barrier between Hamburg's civilian population and the full fury of strategic bombing. The city's elaborate air defense system, built around early warning and coordinated interception, has been rendered as obsolete as a cavalry charge. By 0047, the last bomber clears German airspace, leaving Hamburg burning like a torch against the darkness. The fires will rage for 3 more days, consuming entire districts and creating temperatures hot enough to melt glass and asphalt. But the true damage has already been done in the space of 94 minutes, the amount of time it took for strips of aluminum foil to revolutionize warfare itself. Nosak stands in his garden throughout the entire attack, watching what he will later describe as the end, not just of Hamburg, but of the world he thought he understood. The sound of 1,800 aircraft engines has been replaced by an even more terrible sound, the roar of a firestorm consuming everything in its path. As Baker Fox 202 turns for home, Tommy Barnes realizes with crystalline clarity that he has just participated in something unprecedented in human history. Those innocent-looking strips of foil have accomplished what no weapon before them ever could. They've made an entire city defenseless in the space of a few minutes. The age of electronic warfare has begun, and its first victory belongs to Christmas tinsel falling through the darkness like technological snow. Tommy Barnes lands at RAF Wickenby at 3:22 on July 25, 1943, but the man who climbs out of Baker Fox 2, 02's cramped cockpit, is fundamentally different from the one who took off 6 hours earlier. His hands still shake as he lights his post-mission cigarette, not from fear. He's long past that particular luxury, but from the stunning realization of what those aluminum strips have accomplished. 12 aircraft lost, the intelligence officer reports to the assembled crews during debriefing, out of 791. The number hits the room like a physical blow. In previous raids of similar magnitude, they'd expect to lose 60, 70 aircraft, sometimes more. Tonight, less than 2% of the attacking force failed to return home. The strips of foil that looked like party decorations have achieved something no military strategist dared hope for. They've made strategic bombing survivable. But survival comes with its own psychological burden. Tommy will fly 14 more operations before war's end, but he'll never again experience the same mechanical certainty he felt that night over Hamburg. The knowledge that technology could render an enemy helpless in minutes rather than months changes something fundamental about how he sees warfare itself. In later years, he'll work as an electronics technician in Manchester, helping to develop the radar systems that evolved from those primitive Würzburg installations his window strips destroyed. He never speaks publicly about Hamburg. Meanwhile, in the ruins of that city, Mathilde Wolff-Müncheberg begins the long process of psychological reconstruction that will define the rest of her life. Her letters to her absent children, never sent but carefully preserved, capture the transformation of a woman who watched civilization itself dissolve in a single night. "We all entertain the idea of an apocalypse," she writes weeks later, when her hands have stopped shaking long enough to hold a pen steady. The events of our time suggested it, but we never imagined it would arrive through strips of metal falling from the sky like snow. Hans-Erich Nosack returns to Hamburg 3 days after the firestorm, picking his way through streets where the asphalt has melted and re-solidified like black rivers. The city he knew, the theaters, cafes, and bookshops where he spent his intellectual life, has been reduced to geometric patterns of rubble that suggest rather than define what once stood there. His memoir, The End, Hamburg, 1943, becomes one of the most powerful eyewitness accounts of strategic bombing's human cost. But buried in his philosophical reflections lies a more disturbing truth: the recognition that those aluminum strips represented something more than tactical innovation. They marked the moment when technology definitively surpassed human agency in determining the outcome of warfare. The ripple effects of that July night extend far beyond Hamburg's city limits. German radar technology, suddenly revealed as obsolete, undergoes frantic modernization. Within months, Luftwaffe engineers develop new frequency hopping systems designed to counter Allied jamming. The Allies respond with more sophisticated countermeasures. The electronic warfare arms race that defines modern military technology begins with Tommy Barnes counting to 15 in the darkness above a burning city. But perhaps the most profound impact operates at a deeper level entirely. Weber, the radar operator whose screens went blind that night, survives the war and emigrates to Canada, where he helps develop the NORAD early warning system designed to detect Soviet bombers approaching across the Arctic. The irony isn't lost on him. He spends his post-war career building radar networks sophisticated enough to see through the electronic countermeasures he experienced firsthand in 1943. Today, as cyber warfare specialists discuss blinding enemy communications networks and military planners debate the ethics of autonomous weapon systems, they're wrestling with questions that first emerged in the darkness above Hamburg 80 years ago. When does technological superiority become technological dominance? At what point does innovation cross the line from tactical advantage to fundamental unfairness? The aluminum strips that Tommy Barnes released with such mechanical precision represent the first time in human history that a defensive system could be rendered completely obsolete in minutes rather than years. Every GPS jamming device, every cyber attack on power grids, every electronic warfare system deployed by modern militaries traces its conceptual lineage back to those 30-centimeter strips of foil falling through the July darkness. The night German radar went blind marked more than the destruction of a single city. It announced the arrival of an age when warfare itself would be fought not just with bullets and bombs, but with the invisible weapons of the electromagnetic spectrum. And in the end, perhaps that's the most chilling legacy of Operation Gomorrah, the recognition that the next war might be won or lost before the first shot is ever fired. Want to discover more hidden technologies that changed history? Subscribe for stories of innovation, sacrifice, and the moment everything changed forever.